Good evening, everyone. I'm Manuel Calo, and I'm thrilled to welcome you today's leadership development training. It is February 20th, 2025, and a day dedicated to growth, learning, and the development of powerful leadership skills. We are proud to have El Puente hosting this enriching session in collaboration with incredible Dr. Patty Delgado. Get ready to dive into transformative insights and strategies that will empower you both personally and professionally. Without further ado, I'm going to present Dee and Dr. Delgado.
Thank you, Manuel, and welcome everybody who is tuning in. Dr. Patti, thank you for joining us for one more wonderful session that I know will be on leadership development. This is, we're starting the year off February, and this is when new challenges come, and leadership development is always a great way to continue to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Dean, to all of the ANSO board members, leaders, Sir Jose, also Colonel Jose. Thank you. We are excited to be here. Before we get started, though, if there was any other announcements you wanted to make, Dee, before I jump right in.
Yeah, no, just everybody, thank you for joining us. Yeah, let's jump right in.
All right. Yeah, because we have an hour filled of a great topic that is, I think, as you mentioned, in this day and age where things are a little bit different, there's change that's going on. It's important that we learn this particular leadership skill of how to deal with conflict. What is conflict? Conflict management is really the biggest skill set that we're going to go over today. And so, as Dee mentioned, my name is Dr. Patty Delgado. I am the executive director of El Puente Institute. It's an institute that helps and focuses on our Hispanic, Latino community, as well as other communities of color. And I am also joined by an amazing other Patricia as well, Dr. Patricia Conde Brooks, which is also the other co-founder of El Puente Institute. Well, while we're doing this type of training, we always, when we're in person, which would be wonderful maybe next time, but we always like to just stop and make sure that everybody's views are respected and that we're creating a space of comunidad, a space of familia, where we can talk freely and then also know that this is a learning journey. Your leadership journey is very much a long-term effort. And so this is just going to be one part of that journey. So we hope that you'll take a lot from that. If you are here joining with us in person, here live, like always know that you can use the chat and be part of that conversation here with us. And so just briefly about El Puente, we are an evidence-based firm, consulting firm that focuses on research and allows the research to inform everything we do. Like we said, we're about comunidad. I think now more than ever in today's ever-changing world, being able to come together like this and learn from each other is really important, to know that you're not alone. We also are about unlocking the potential of leaders all over the US. And again, focusing on the research. So everything you're going to hear today is evidence-based. We've been able to look at the research on conflict management and have been able to put together an amazing training for you all today. And more than ever, know that your growth as a leader has no boundaries. There's no borders and there's no fronteras, as we say. You will constantly be learning and be advancing who you are as a leader to serve the people in your unit or your team and so forth. So today we're going to hop in to really just go to a basic top level. What is conflict? Then we're going to talk about misconceptions about conflict, right? And the realities of what really conflict is. We're going to understand the different ways and sources that types of conflicts that may come up in the workplace. Then we're going to provide you with 5 strategies. And that's where you want to take out your pen, your paper, type, whatever it is, to get those 5 strategies to help advance in your own conflict management skill set. And more than anything, understanding the difference between expectations and agreements. A lot of times when we are leading groups, we lack the communication to provide them the information to ensure there is an agreement, not an expectation. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as one of the main strategies to ensure that conflict is part of your team and is something that's going to provide you new ways of being innovative, new ways of coming together, and is going to be a positive part of your team and your leadership. So usually, and maybe Dee, you can kind of give us yours since we have you here with us. Initially, your reaction when you think about conflict? Like, what do you see? A lot of people, either they run or hide, they face it head on, they're ready. They're either peacemakers and they try to make peace with everybody, or some people ignore it altogether. And none of these are right or wrong. These are very natural human behaviors when it comes to conflict. I don't know if you want to share it with us real quick.
Yeah, of course. And I don't know, and many people may think this way, but I face it head on, but I
Okay.
take it as a personal challenge, right? When it could be something more general, like, but I take it very personal, like, all right, it's a challenge accepted. Let's take it, right?
Yeah, yeah, good, good. And those are very proactive ways of looking at conflict. But there are some individuals that just sometimes they'll just ignore it and hope that it goes away, right? Or they'll be the ones that says, no, everybody, it's going to be fine. We're going to work this out. All of these again are very natural ways of handling conflict. And so we are going to now, I'm going to skip this next slide. Or maybe D, you can also provide us. A lot of people, when we talk about conflict, they think, well, there's a lot of different ways conflict looks in the workplace. But what do you believe is the most common reason for conflict in the workplace? I already can think
I
about like
think one something that I experience that I have experienced more often has been different backgrounds, like
okay.
different
Yeah.
backgrounds, not only with like the type of work that we have done in the past, how we have
Mhm.
handled certain tasks before, right? How we were trained. Maybe they have showed us how to get to the same result, but different ways.
Yeah.
So that's what I see the most, just different approaches.
Different approaches, right? And that can come from different cultural backgrounds, different generation backgrounds, right? I mean, we're working now with sometimes 5 generations in the workplace. And so even though that type of background, it could even be also expertise, not necessarily something from an identity perspective, but an expertise perspective. And so there are a lot of different different reasons that conflict may come up in the workplace. But thank you for sharing.
I
Um,
think generational, it's one of the big ones right now. Yeah, like conflict management, right? Generational, and even like especially within the military, right? You have different
mhm.
generations, and then the approach or how they think is like, oh my God, like that's old school. That's how they used to do it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's different generational disparities right now. I think is it could be a big conflict in the work environment. And from our YouTube chat, we have Diego saying lack of communication.
Yeah, definitely the skill of how to communicate, verbally, non-verbally, and so forth. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Diego. We appreciate you participating here with us from YouTube. Also, lack of listening skills. So many different skill sets come in to the aspect and concept of conflict management. So we're going to dig right into some of those and then be able to go over them. Now we start kind of with this quote from Nelson Mandela, right? That just helps us kind of level set what happens if conflict is not resolved, and what happens if we don't remember, what happened in the past, and bring those either celebrations or challenges, or I don't want to say errors, but maybe those mistakes that occurred to now how we could do things better in the future. And so we like to level set with that. But more than anything, I'm going to start with some very basic definitions. What is conflict in the workplace? So conflict, of course, from an academic, we're academics, so we always like to kind of start with foundational definitions. It's a process by which teams and individuals perceive the impact of others' actions as negative. It really is the process of perception. It's not always factual. It's sometimes just like the way that you see the other person, maybe biases that you have, or other interactions, that it always comes up like, oh my, it's very negative. And so we always try to begin with that to ensure that everybody has a full understanding. Also, conflict is uncomfortable, right? Because sometimes we have to have very, what they say, crucial conversations with our team members, our leaders. But knowing that that uncomfortableness is a opportunity for growth, but also knowing that this is a normal part of the way the humans behave and communicate. And so also understanding that conflict will occur. it can be managed in different ways, in very constructive ways and very destructive ways. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. It is not always black and white. And so that's probably the biggest challenge I have with our clients that we coach. If they think it's either this or it's either that, but there's no gray in between. And there is some gray. And there is opportunities to become very balanced in how you approach a conflict management situation. It is a natural part of teams. We're all different. We're made up of different backgrounds, of different ways of looking at it, education, experience. We're all going to see things from a different lens. So already as a leader, know you will have some form of conflict. And it also is very much emotionally based, right?
Mm.
Sometimes it just hits an individual non-factually again, and now it hits the emotions. And when emotions are involved, do you probably know that things kind of can get a little heated? And so that, the conflict is so much of so many things, but it's not just negative. And so that's the point of these two slides, that it's not just negative.
Yeah, and from our LinkedIn viewers, right, they commented like competition. And I have to say, we have a high drive, and we become very competitive, right? It
Mhm.
becomes a competition of like, I'm right, you're right, but what you're saying versus what I'm saying. Which one is better? So yeah, absolutely.
I know more than you know because I've been here longer. Yeah,
Yeah,
so many of these, again, emotional thinking patterns start
right.
coming out. But as leaders, and that's why it's so important, training such as this, as leaders, we need to be very much aware that this is going to happen. And how do you manage that between your team so that you maintain productivity and efficiency? And so some misconceptions about conflict is that, again, that it's negative and bad, that it should be avoided, right? That we should always play nice in the sandbox. Conflicts can and should be resolved, but sometimes we need to know that we'll agree to disagree, and that is okay too. That all conflicts are personal. So if I have a conflict with you, Dee, and I disagree with something that you bring into the meeting, it's personal. It's because I don't like you. Those are misconceptions. That's not always the case. Sometimes people have really great feedback in a meeting that's only going to improve the process or going to improve the way that a particular project is being run. Conflict equals failure. So a lot of leaders sometimes prevent their teams from having conflict because then they think their team is going to fail or that their leadership is failing as well. And more than anything, in a lot of things that we do when it comes to human behavior, that there's a one solution fits all, and there isn't. The solution to this is very complex. And so once we can learn what it is, how it looks like in our own leadership style and in our teams, then we're able to really manage it. And the last, understanding these misconceptions can help create a culture where conflict is seen as something natural, manageable, and part of our work. This is also very like in our relationships, right? Personal relationships, and we could see that we're sometimes going to disagree, and that is okay. It's always good to know and get reminded of these. There's also improper handlings of conflict that happen a lot with leaders. And it's probably for many reasons, but a lot of it can be mitigated when they understand and have training such as this. So the handling of just not, we're just not going to talk about it in this meeting. We're just going to hope nobody says anything like that. Avoiding it, definitely not going to be help. Or maybe having a very intense emotion at the burst of whatever the conflict is, or being passive aggressive, right? There's always that one side or the other, or just not speaking of the situation, but not addressing conflict. And for those out of anything that you get out of this training, not addressing conflict in a healthy manner can be even more detrimental to your team and to your team's productivity and longevity and retention. And we don't right now, we cannot be losing people in our organizations right now. We need to be able to retain them. And so not addressing the conflict is not the answer. So we are going to go through some other information on what is really the reality. And then I'm going to talk about some sources of conflict so that we can get a better idea what it looks like in practice. So the reality is any healthy relationship, healthy partnership, healthy business partnership requires some form of disagreement. And you will have a disagreement. Most effective teams right now and leaders are those that can sit and listen and create a solution together and allow for differences to be heard, embrace the differences to become innovation, bring in the challenges. Like you said, Dee, you come head on, let's talk about this. and they really take this as an opportunity to create a new solution. When you see a team with no conflict, there's probably something happening in the background, right?
Yes,
There's
there's
probably
a
some,
lot
a
of
lot.
like conflict underneath the rug.
Yes.
It's not coming out.
And it's probably, if you were to sit and observe like a mosquito on the wall or whatever,
Yeah.
you probably see that it's very passive aggressive, or people are scared to speak up. And so there's a lot of ways that you can get that red signal that, okay, something's going on here. We need to have more conversations.
Yeah,
Um,
and a lot of times when the conflict resolution conversations, right, are not conducive, people will shut down and like not provide input in the future. So it's like they've given up, like, no, they never listened to me, right? But given ownership, a piece of resolution, it gets them their buy-in into how we're going to work together as a team. So yeah, bringing everybody together, I mean, you may learn something new. We all do
yeah.
every day.
And the scary, not scary, but the most alarming thing about conflict is that it happens so fast. It can happen just about anything very small to very big. And like you said, it can shut down a person's engagement level just like that in a minute, in seconds, and so forth. So being able to, as a leader, see what's happening, then now mitigate it and now resolve it, is really where effective leadership occurs when it comes to conflict management. Is being able to even see, oh, someone's not speaking up here in this meeting. I'm curious what's happening. What can we do to get their voice in the room or at the table and so forth? So yeah, so as leaders, we have to know all of this. So many things we have to do as leaders, but we have the capacity to do it. And so there's different forms of conflict, and you're probably seeing some of these already in your workplace with your own team. With other teams is a communication issue. I think Diego mentioned that, right? This lack of communication, assuming that everybody knows what's going on. Sometimes I give advice to my leaders that I coach is to sometimes over communicate, because there's so much going on that people do miss out on an email or miss out on a particular set of information. And so they're lost. And that can cause a conflict. Even roles and responsibilities also. So unclear job roles, responsibilities, unclear expectations and duties will also cause conflict, especially with our younger generation. As we talk about generations, we really need to map out the expectations for them and what it looks like. That is just the way that generation, especially our Gen Z generation, this is the way that they've learned, is very process and very clear steps. So us as seasoned leaders, as I like to call us, need to understand, right, that that's how they process information. And so being able to understand that role of that individual, personality clashes, an extrovert to an introvert, a cultural difference to another, a level of expertise to this. There's a lot of intergroup dynamics that happens as well. And then inequities, unfair treatment that happens inside the workplace, very undercurrent bullying that could possibly create conflict. And so we can't disregard that that can also be a source of the conflict. And then competition, even resource competitions. Oh, this is one I hear a lot. Why does the IT team get to remote work and we as the HR have to come to the office, right? So this is the whole resource of why do they remote and we have to come in? I mean, or different, like, why does the team have iPads and we don't? And so there's a lot of that kind of sources of conflict that come up. Are there any here that kind of shine through for you?
And like one that I was going to ask, like, because they perceived inequity, right? Could you explain a little bit on that? Because I think, like for me, when I think of that, is I may think it's an inequity, but I really don't know the big picture, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm.
I have not been informed of the full plan for it. So I see it that maybe like I'm not being selected for that, right? Why? But then in the big plan is like I'm not being selected for that because they have other plans for my role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the lack of possible information. And again, it is very perception driven. A lot of these are very perception driven. When an employee believes that it's unfair, that they didn't get that promotion or that they're not part of that particular project, or that they're getting more work, there's a resentment that starts to grow when there is a lack of why this, why that. And so again, this concept of over communicating to an individual can really be helpful, because people do want to understand why. Now, do they agree with the why is a different story, but at least they know the circumstances of why, instead of them perceiving and creating a story in their head that it's me, they don't like me, and so forth. Because that can be very emotionally detrimental to the individual and then to the morale of the team. So that one is really, it's a hard one. It's a hard one as a leader, because sometimes we can't disclose certain information to the team for whatever reason. But there is still a fairness to disclose some of the information for the individual to not perceive it as unfair, unequitable.
100%.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one. So these types of conflicts that we see are in 3 groups. And so you'll be able to kind of figure out which type of conflicts you may be seeing a lot in your teams, because during your team, let's say, growth and team cycle, you might have at a period of time process conflict. Or maybe you have now a whole new team and there's now relational conflicts because you're trying to just understand each other and get to know each other. Or there's task conflicts, or at sometimes you may have them all or not have them at all. But it's good to know which ones they are so that you right away as a leader can identify them to understand how to then approach the conflict. So we're going to go through each one. And then if anybody has questions, please, at YouTube, please let us know. We are monitoring everything here. I'm going to pause here real quick because I see Diego mentioned sometimes family or origin roles get played out at work or in other teams. Yes. Yeah, and that's another, that should be a part of our sources of conflict. The intersection between your personal life and your professional life. And that's how sometimes that kind of comes into play. We bring our whole self, which includes our personal life and views, into the workplace. So definitely.
And I will even say, even those motherly or fatherly figures,
Yes.
right? We see that especially with like the generations, different generations, and now Gen Z in the workplace with, is you see the fatherly and motherly, kind of things going on.
Yes, I have a really an example of that. And we were in a leadership training that we were facilitating, and one of the Latinas says, I feel as a leader I have to be la mamá de todos los pollitos, the mother of all the chickens, of all the
Yes.
right? And so that whole, perception that she has to take care of her team all the time was really holding her team from being innovative on their own. And so it's
Yes.
when we can see these personal and family and cultural origins and nuances in our leadership, and also now these workplace nuances in our leadership, is when we can really be that leader that is very good at seeing it and then pivoting and then readdressing it, right? So that the team then continues to function.
And yeah, and
Properly.
I was just to add to that one is like when you have a leader who is like at like the mamá de los pollitos, but then you have someone who is always taking care of everything at home and for everybody, then that may be seen as a micromanager, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's not really micromanagement. It's just that's how they're used to
Yes.
operating, right? Always taking care of the family, always taking care of everything. And so they bring that into the work and that is seen completely different.
Yeah.
Over here, you're being seen as the caretaker, you're a dad, you're always taking care of this. But here, you're a micromanager. You don't let
Right.
us do anything. So, yeah.
And it's all about perception. Like the
Yep.
team is perceiving, and she's like, I'm just helping you. I just want you to succeed. And their
Yeah.
perception is totally something different. Yes. And so this is why this whole topic is so big right now. And I think ongoing in leadership development, it's a really good topic to really embrace and reflect on, and then really know what to do as a leader to ensure that your team is successful. So let's go through each of these, and then we can have some conversations about this. So the first one is around tasks, right? So the task conflict arises when there are disagreements among the team about the content of the task being performed, like including differences of opinions, viewpoints, ideas, goals, strategies. It's very task oriented. So an example, like, should we use a social media or a print media campaign? This is like for a marketing team. Or a team member may disagree on how to approach a particular project, or which solution is most effective to solve a problem. And so there's like disagreements that are happening. Some advantages of mitigating task conflict is it allows for the team, when you can really manage this dynamic, to become more creative and innovative, to really tap into that as you all are creating solutions together. And when managed properly, of course, you increase not only the creativity and the innovation, but the morale. People feel excited to talk about, create something new. And so, however, if it's not handled well, it can lead to a lot of frustration within a team and the lack of progress. People shut down, and they won't put their 2 cents in for a particular solution. So it's very task oriented. The next one is process, right? And so in a process conflict, usually the conflict is centered around a disagreement about the logistics of how the task should get carried out. Who is in charge? What are the roles? How do we allocate, certain roles to certain people? So for example, a team member might argue over who is responsible for a task in order to ensure that the steps are being done right. Or for example, as it shows here, should we, this is a construction example, pour more concrete section by the section or continuously to save time, right? And so this is probably where the generation differences come in a lot in this particular conflict, because the younger generation is like, how can we use technology to streamline this process? And the older generation is like, no, we're going to use an Excel spreadsheet and this piece of paper that I've been writing on for years. And so this probably is where generational differences showcase a little bit more, is in this, because the younger generation has so much more advanced technological insight sometimes than us senior leaders. And so if you do allow that kind of innovation to flow through, processes can become very streamlined and more efficient for an organization. And that's exactly what we want, right? We want to work smarter, not harder. So if you are a leader and you see these disagreements from this process perspective, the best thing is to do is just to pause, of course, and to allow for the ideas to be discussed. Okay, well, tell me more about how you see that process working with this IT program, or tell us more about this and that. And so it can really be pretty magical from a process perspective when this can be done really, really well.
And now, if I may just add,
Yes,
from the military perspective, right? I know like the task and the processes are very um, guided based on the rank, what the mission is, what the
right.
specific job is, right? So sometimes in leadership, what you may say, well, you have to do that way because I said so, right? and and you have some leadership styles that are like that. And I know when I was a private, I was like, all right, I'm not even going to ask why I'm doing that. Like, why did I even come out of my mouth, right? Like, I knew better. But when it comes to the military, some of the processes and the tasks are bound by the military
Yeah.
guidance, the military restrictions that we have.
Mhm.
But if you, as a leader, if you look within those boundaries, how much flexibility do you have within those boundaries, right, to allow for innovation and for
Mhm.
mentorship to take place, right? That's where you can come in and say, well, no, we have to do that way because this is what they tell us. Okay,
Mhm.
well, now as a leader, look in between those boundaries and how much room do you have to allow for innovation and for mentorship to develop.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation and strategy. Yes, as a leader, to understand that, because the disadvantage of this, if it's not done correctly or even reflected from a leader's perspective of how this could be done better, there's a lot of negative, long-lasting negative emotions that stay with that individual and the team. And that's hard to kind of bring back to a positive state because now emotions are involved. And so it makes it really hard, especially when you need to always constantly being more efficient and streamline your work. When this is shut down, especially with the younger generation, they will shut down. They will
Yeah,
not.
and I think that by allowing that and being that leader that becomes a mentor, right? Then you begin to build loyalty and
Mhm.
people will begin to follow more. And so yeah, it's a fine kind of
Yes,
balance that probably you have to do.
definitely. Yes, yes, for sure. It's not as bam, 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 like the task one. But now the next one is even a bigger one than the other two, because it's based on personal differences versus task or processes. So now we're into now the emotional, human behavioral, the way you show up at work, part of conflict. So this goes to like the micromanaging. This goes to like the example where the supervisor is highly detail oriented, micromanages the team. While another leader is very like, oh, I trust you, do however, whatever you think it works. Yeah, this one can be very, very detrimental to the team if there isn't a safe space. And I say safe space, or a space where people can really have a conversation about, well, what exactly is it? Let's talk about like the micromanaging, having a conversation, an open conversation, a safe conversation with your leader to say, well, this particular example, I felt like I was being restricted on the idea that I had that I know could help the team. So this one can be very tough, but very doable and key when you can really master this particular one. So it requires a lot of conversation. It requires a lot of empathy. It requires a lot of self-awareness, of understanding your own biases, of the way you're speaking is showing up. So there's a lot of self-awareness that goes with this one. This one can really not only be destructive from an individual personal, but morale-wise in a team, in an organization, in a unit, really, really fast.
And it
And
could
just
be
be
one
very
of the
counter.
hard ones. I think it could be one of the hardest one because it takes a lot of strength to take ownership of your own, biases and
Mhm,
self things, right? Because now you're looking inward,
mhm.
right? And then you're reflecting it out and telling everybody, hey, this is how I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's very much about the self.
Mhm.
And the only way a leader can really master this is by being very open to understanding themselves, and also being very comfortable with saying, you know what, everybody, I was wrong. I did this, I presented this in this way and it didn't work out. How can we do it better? Yeah, and that type of leadership is huge. And one that it has honor with it, one that comes with a lot of respect when a leader can do that. And so yeah, this is definitely a very hard one, but totally doable. I've seen plenty leaders that know how to have this kind of conflict resolution from a very relational perspective. And so really quickly, of course, because we are an institute and we like research, we always like to provide a little bit of data of what happens when conflict isn't addressed in the workplace. It can be very costly, not only from a money, but from a time perspective. So an actively disengaged employee costs about $3,400 for every 10,000 of their salary. So ultimately, according to Gallup, like 34%, meaning the company can lose 34% of productivity per person when there's disengagement, or when there's turnover. That this number continues to shift in the research that we've noticed, that sometimes the turnover can be triple the salary of the individual. Having an employee turnover can, also cause that time frame and the lag of work to be done and then placed on everybody else on the team. There's a lot of costs to that. And then last but not least, the reduced productivity. So apparently 4.34 hours per week are being dealt with conflict at work, whether it's process, relational, or task. Which if you think about it, we're only at work for like 8 hours. Maybe, we go to the coffee, we have lunch, maybe 6 hours.
I
There's
was
not
going
a
to
lot of
say that
hours,
is like half of the day
half
is
of the
then
day.
dealing with conflict.
Now, this can show as conflict, very verbal conflict or disagreement, or very passive aggressive conflict and disagreement. But it still shows. However, we're all human at the end of this, so it would still show up, or it'll show up in disengagement. And
It
someone
shows
just
up probably in productivity, right?
also,
Because
oh
if
yeah,
there is internal conflict with something, I may take my time on completing that task that you sent me, asking me to put a rush on it,
yes.
right? I may be like, oh, I didn't see the email. I don't know what happened, right? So yeah, productivity, 100%, half of the day. Jesus.
That's a revenge when you just described. Like,
Maybe that's just the, yeah, that's just me coming out.
yeah. No, and there's just different human behaviors, natural human behaviors that maybe should be better mitigated and managed just personally. But we can't deny that those things do come up whenever there is conflict, or people are just like, I'm done, I'm out. I know in the military it's a little bit different for people because of the obligation that you have.
We
However,
really, we can't just really just be out and say, I'm
exactly. But you can be disengaged at some
done.
points, and that in itself
100%. Yeah.
is still hard. Yeah, it's still loss of time, loss of productivity, loss of efficiency. So there's a big cost. Before I go to the next one, if you wouldn't mind, Dee, just monitoring my time because I don't have a clock around me to tell me
Yes.
how much more time I
We're
have.
6 minutes past the hour.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Usually when we're in a big group, we like to have people share a particular recent conflict that they've experienced. And I hate to put you on the spot. And if you don't want to share, that's okay. But usually in best way to, start understanding conflict is to have examples of, what was a recent conflict that someone experienced? What was the source? Was it process? Was it task? Was it relational? What type? How did the team impact look like? Or the individual? How did you sense the morale? How did you sense the emotions that are come part with that conflict? And then how did you then manage the conflict? What were those steps you took? And so there are, a lot of great leaders share, and maybe that's something that your listeners can do is possibly share a conflict in the way that they resolve that conflict with their team. Because the more that we can see it and hear it, the better that we're going to be able to do it ourselves. And be able to say, oh, that person did that. That was really great. I think I could do that as well. And so that's a really great exercise that we could do.
Yeah, and I'll just share something
Uh-huh.
quick. And when I moved positions, and it was two of us in the office, and roles and assignments were not defined, right?
Okay.
They were not clearly defined. Neither one of us was above the other one. We were both equal. So it's not like one was in charge of the other one and vice versa.
Uh-huh.
So when the task came to our box, then there was really not a lot of communication or guidance as to whose task it was. So it took whoever took the initiative to like, all right, I'll take care of that, versus okay, somebody else took the other one, and there was no communication as to how it was done. Was it completed?
Mm.
Was it not? Right. So it was because it was a lot of ambiguity on the roles, in of the our positions in that office,
Mm-hmm.
right? And our leader was not clear about what each of us role was in that office, right?
Yeah.
So it became a relational thing, right? That we both had to come to a meeting and say, okay, what's happening? Like, we're dropping the ball a lot. Like, he's coming in here, our boss is coming in here asking for things that are not getting done. We're both being blamed for it. Like, what is happening? Right.
Mhm.
So it's like,
Mhm.
well, neither one of us have clear guidance. So I think let's ask for a meeting with our boss and let him know that the lack of guidance is really causing a problem, a productivity problem
Yeah.
between us that could turn into relational later, because then it could be like, well, why didn't she do this task? Well, why didn't she do that task? Right. And so we did, and he acknowledged that that was a mistake in his part to not
Mhm.
be clear, with what his expectations were of each one of us,
Yeah.
right? And he put in place, okay, this is what the office goal is. This is what that both of you can, however you split the work, I really don't care. You two work that out. So
Yeah,
he
figure it
gave
out.
us back ownership of the
Yeah.
process, right? Which it was a great thing to do because then it gave us ownership of like what are we best at, right?
Yes.
And then we went from there. So him recognizing that, yes, it was my fault for not establishing clear roles and
Mm-hmm.
giving us the ownership to define and outline our processes, make us allowed us to take ownership of our own work, right? Which just helped improve the process and helped us feel like proud, like, hey, this is my work, this is how I'm doing it, this is how I
Mm-hmm.
so I think that was it took a lot for him
Took a
for
lot, and it's exhausting, I'm sure.
yes, it was.
I
And yeah,
know.
I would come home and I'd be like, I don't know why this is not get it done. And then so it took a lot from the both of us to come together, then ask for a meeting, and then talk to and be direct with our boss, and then for our boss to accept all of that. But it was a process that needed to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that it was a positive outcome and that we were able to move forward instead of if we would have just sat there and not said anything and continued to create our own story in
And
our mind.
fester in the whole thing of it all. Oh, yes. And
Yeah.
that's where it's like the whole story turns into this whole, like we say in novela, this whole
Yes.
drama of, oh my God,
Yes.
he
Yeah.
is this and that and this. Yes. Yeah. And I think you brought up a really good point that if you're a leader listening right now, you need to take into account that the lack of expectations and clarity of tasks is one of the main reasons why conflict begins. So as a leader, although we're moving fast and we have things to do and we're responsible for this and we're responsible for that, we do need to take the time. We owe it to our teams to take the time to ensure that they are very clear about the task at hand and that they have everything they need. And so some leaders forget that part, and not to their fault, but just because leadership is so encompassing when you are. But it's important to know that you do need to take that time to ensure that, does everybody understand this particular project and the roles and all of that? Because if you do that up front, a lot of this would not happen, and you'll save so much time and productivity and lack of productivity if
Yeah.
that is taken up front. And that's one of the biggest leadership strategies that we recommend when it comes to conflict management. You have to know that that's your job as a leader, to ensure
Yes.
that communication is clear. Yeah. Thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing that. That's a great example, and just a great example of how you handled it in case your leader didn't do that initially in the beginning, but how you both came back and said, excuse me, we do need to have a meeting here. We're a little bit unclear. So you even recognized it too. So that's always great to do. And so here's the different types of solutions. So if you're going to take any notes in this particular training, I would do it now. Strategies for you as a leader, as someone part of a team, to take upon yourself to learn and ensure you know how to do. Of course, the strategy number one, like we were just talking, open communication, open and clear communication, very transparent, very inquisitive, ensuring that you're expressing your concerns, but you're also having conversations about your disagreements, you're actively listening, empathizing, and all of that. So all those skills come to play in this particular strategy. The second one is addressing issues early, and that goes to my point that I just shared. If the leader can address the issue of lack of clarity early on in the whole process, it's going to create less stress, less disengagement, and it is exhausting for the people that are involved in the conflict. So best strategy, address it early. If as soon as you see it as a leader, address it early. It's always easy. This third one is very easy. I would train previously in my past professional life, train on how to have a crucial conversation. And the biggest tip they told us in that training to teach our trainees or the people in the participants is to always lead with facts. Focus on the facts of the situation, not the emotion. And so facts can be like, you stared at me ugly. Well, that is not really a fact. That's a perception. Well, I perceive she stared at me ugly. So we have to really learn, like, a fact is you raised your hand and you stomped your fist onto my desk. That's very factual. No one can deny that they did something in that effect. So this one is really important. Focus on the issue. Focus on the situation, the task, not the individual. not the emotion. And so that one's it's pretty tough, but when you know how to do that, being very factual, allowing any of your biases for that particular individual that you may have not interfere with it, there could be a resolution really, really quickly. Seek win-win situations, and this means to always aim for resolution, not for, okay, we'll just talk about this later. No, there's always a resolution, focusing on finding that common ground with the person, creating mutual beneficial outcomes, mutual listening. This is an extraordinary leader that can do this. It's always come in to the situation with wanting to have a win-win situation and solution, not a I win, you lose solution. And the last but not least, mediation if needed, or a third-party intervention. Sometimes if the conflict is that intense and causing that much disengagement or disruption in work, then having somebody come in that's not part of the team, a third party, is always a good choice and always a good resolution as well. So good different strategies that you can do. And I would either take a screenshot and just kind of reflect which one you do really well. And then the last thing is around the difference between expectations and agreements. Expectations, when leading with expectations, we are probably going to fall short because we're already leading with an assumption, with our beliefs, with what we think versus what really needs to be done. It's very vague. It's very stressful because we're kind of unsure. So kind of like in your example, D, you're not sure. What do we do? What do we do? And it's not very direct in what is expected. So their expectations. A lot of the time, also it can be detrimental because the leader can expect one thing, the team does another thing, and now nobody's happy.
Yeah.
And so we always say there's more value in agreements than expectations, because when you agree, there's a mutual agreement and understanding of, do you want to go out to have some dinner? Sure, I want to go out to have some dinner. Do you agree we're going to go out to? Yeah, we're going to agree. Okay, great. Agreement mutual. We're going to dinner, right? Versus, where do you want to go have dinner? I guess I have this conversation with my spouse. What do we need to do? Oh, whatever you want. Oh, whatever you want. There's no agreement. There's just, oh, whatever you think, and so it's very vague. Agreements are the key to very clear conflict resolution, clear statements, co-creating that solution, promoting accountability and collaboration. And so an example, a manager and employee agree that the task will be completed by next Tuesday versus when you get that task done, let me know. Oh no, because that person can wait till next year. But agreement is very clear and said, do you agree next Tuesday? I agree next Tuesday. Great. We'll see you next Tuesday. Putting people very much accountable. That needs to be done a lot with the younger generation. Yes. Is creating agreement, because then they feel like they're part of this, which is rightfully so. And you now have a clear outcome and a clear timeline of when things need to be done. So the agreement part is really big with our younger generation, just being able to do that. So that's really, really powerful. Really, really powerful.
Yeah, clear expectations and like on the due dates, right? What is the urgency of this specific task so that I can prioritize like within my list of things to do. And then the expectations, right? They vary from person to person, from job to job, right? Like my expectation of what a job well done is, it could be here, while my boss's expectation is over here. Even though I feel that I met the expectation, well, it's not like I didn't meet his expectation, right? So it is 100% the agreement on like, well, the goal is to meet 100 clients this month, right?
Correct.
Now you have a number, right? I agreed to contact 100 clients. So now we have a plan.
Even more, 100 clients, 5 each day, and finish by this date. Like if you, a leader, can even give and then say, how does that sound? Are you in agreement with that? Yeah. Oh, well, I really can't do 5 days. Is it all right if I do maybe 10 or 3 each day and I can finish in this date? But yeah, that's doable. I am in agreement with that. That's kind of the dialogue that needs to happen. I know it sounds very like, I haven't got time for that. I had a leader tell me, I don't have time for that, Dr. Patty. Like, I have to move. And I'm like, okay, but then you're going to spend more time trying to resolve the outcome that's going to come out after that because of the lack of agreement. So it's up to you. I basically said it's your choice as a leader what you want to do.
In military leadership, right, this could be very, very tricky and very challenging because you have rank and you have positions. You have, you
Yes.
know, lower ranking to where it's like, well, just go do it, finish it by this time I told you. You know, it's like we really don't have much of a choice for an agreement or not agreement. I have to go do it anyways, right? But if you have built and strengthened and like build that sense of like loyalty, right, with your troops, it's like they're gonna go ahead and do it, and you're gonna have agreement like no matter what, because they trust you and they know like what your goals and what your personality of leadership style is probably.
But I'll even challenge that a little bit because although I am a military spouse, so I understand the hierarchy of the military. However, I do know that military leaders do everything in their power to be better leaders. And although there's a hierarchy, the ability to create agreement can still be done. It's if they take the initiative to create that agreement is what makes them an extraordinary leader. And so I do, again, I understand there's circumstances and there's other, there's certain things that they have to agree on. That's great. But when a military leader takes it to the next step and asks for that agreement from their team, there's even that much more respect that's going to be given to them. So this is a challenge to leaders, military leaders around, in all units to maybe also practice this ability of doing agreements versus just they know people are going to get it done because that's their rank. And so I challenge those. I challenge
And
those.
I'm glad and happy that you challenged it, because I was like, let me see if I'm gonna drop this nugget here, you know, and she's gonna like say, well, no, actually good leaders do
Yes.
this, right? So
Yes.
absolutely, thank you.
And the thing that we're seeing in the research we're doing with Gen Z, maybe even Gen Z soldiers or Marine or airmen that come in, whoever, just from the Gen Z generation, is they already see their leaders as their friend. There is no hierarchy in their thinking. It's
Oh my God,
egalitarian.
so
We're all
true.
equal.
So
So
true.
if we are going to, not, I don't like to say accommodate to that generation, but if we are going to create mutual understanding with that generation, we are going to have to be better at creating agreements with this generation because they don't see a hierarchy. They don't. And that's just part of their own generation. And we have to respect that that's part of a characteristic of their generation. And so unlike a baby boomer definitely sees hierarchy. But that was just the way, and so yeah, so this is the challenge for leaders, that we need to continue thinking outside of there's more to being a leader. And so I challenge them to take agreements as part of their leadership style. And here's some different how to create powerful agreements. So if you are taking that challenge and trying to do more agreements within your team, open communication, ensuring everybody is clear about what is going to be done, expressing, different possible limitations, capabilities, who has what talents, and so forth. Find a middle ground, negotiate, be very specific, outline, have a goal, have a plan, commitment, secure a verbal commitment. Okay, or even written, that's even better, right? But sometimes it's like, yeah, sure, I got it, boss, got it. Sometimes that even verbal commitment is pretty commitment, but if you can say, how are you in agreement with that? Or just say, how does that look like for you? Are we in agreement? Using the word agreement in your dialogue is even better. It's even that much more powerful. And then following up, checking in, how's it going? How's that going? In this agreement, we said this, and this. Where are you at with that? This also allows leaders to hold people accountable in a very human-centric way, in a very respectful way, versus you didn't do that when I told you to do that. No, it's like in this agreement that you and I made the other day, I noticed you didn't get quite to this particular goal. Help me understand why that is. It allows for you to be a very human-centric leader, which I think nowadays it's really needed, even in the military. Even in the military.
Yeah. I will say I'm a firm believer in if we had a conversation and I agreed to something, I'm gonna follow it up with an email. Hey, boss, just to make sure that I understood correctly, you want this, this, and this from me by this date and in this manner, right? And send an email, right?
Yeah.
Because then that clarifies for me, right, that yes, I understood correctly, and now I have a written agreement, right?
Yes.
That is the way to go.
And sometimes when leaders don't do that due diligence of either doing a verbal agreement or a written, their team can easily come back and say, well, you didn't tell me what to do. You didn't give me a date. And that's when the leader's like, oh God, I don't have time. I'm
I
doing a
thought
lot of
I
things.
did told you, yes.
Yeah, I told you, don't you remember? This is
Mhm.
very, I'm having these dialogues in my own personal relations. Like, I told you, don't you? It's
Yes.
really easy to not get into the habit of doing these things, but it's better and more productive for your team if you can really master that agreement part of it. So I hope that we've been able to provide you all with some nuggets, some strategies about conflict management. Understand that it's neither good or bad. It is going to be part of your team's world, part of your own leadership. When it is unaddressed, it can lead to even more harmful effects, not just from a productive perspective, efficiency perspective, but also from an emotional perspective. You have to know the tools and resources that you have at your disposal as a leader to help mitigate any sort of conflict that may arise. And conflicts are very unlikely to be resolved. And this, I read this, I want to read this very much by word. Conflicts are very unlikely to be resolved over email, text, and voicemail. Maybe I might disagree just a little bit. You probably could do some resolution via email. But ultimately, if it's gone that far, you do have to have a conversation. And that is hard to do. Definitely hard to do. But as leaders, we challenge ourselves to be better and do better. And so having those conversations, they should be discussed or be mediated by somebody else to help you. So key takeaways with all of this, and hope that you all were able to gain a little bit of information and be better leaders for today's soldiers, airmen, marine men, sailors, and also wherever you are listening and wherever you're a leader in. So thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patty. Thank you so much. This really, for me personally, right, it really helps kind of put into like hold me accountable, right? For what, like in my me, even a leadership position, I don't have to be a boss, like supervisor or anything. Just I could be a leader within my own small project, right? And even then, I could use definitely put to use this perspectives and this things that you went over today, and just the agreements, this be specific. All of those things are like huge takeaways. I really appreciate you joining us tonight and providing this amazing training.
Thank you. You all are amazing to be partners with. Everybody at El Puente Institute, we love being partners with ANSO. So we support everything you're doing. And together, juntos, I know that we're going to continue creating great leaders. So thank you all for your partnership.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Well, everyone, thank you for joining today. I hope this training you find us helpful and inspire as insightful we did. Your engagement and passion for leadership make us all different. Keep applying what you learn, stay connected, and continue to lead with purpose. This is Manacado signing off. Until next time, keep shining and pushing boundary. Let's go, mi gente.